and welcome to our webinar, CMDB Pulse, a total health check for ServiceNow. Thank you for joining today. We are going to get started. My name is Rachel, and I would like to introduce our speakers for today's call. First, we have Josh Burnson. He is our Chief Technology Officer, as well as James Burson, our ITOM Practice Director, both coming with years of experience and industry expertise to talk about the CMDB Pulse offering. At ITS Partners, we are a proud ServiceNow Elite partner with a wide range of industry experience. We are experts ready to help you reach your goals. I am looking forward to the content Josh and James have for you today, as I really believe everyone can benefit from CMDB Pulse. So, without further ado, I will hand things off to Josh and James.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome to everybody who's joining us. So today we're going to talk about CMDB Pulse, ITS's newest offering. CMDB Pulse is a total CMDB health check for ServiceNow. And we're going to take our time to dive into CMDB Pulse and talk about why we've built this health check. First, I wanted to go through some of the questions that have driven us to build CMDB Pulse. We've been working with CMDB for almost 20 years, and there are people at ITS who have worked with it even longer. And so we've received a lot of questions over the years in our attempt to help people mature their CMDB and build a healthy CMDB. So James and I are going to go through some of those very common questions to help you understand why we built CMDB Pulse and how it can help you. So the first question, one of the most common questions that we get about the CMDB is, what is a healthy CMDB anyway? So James, can you dive into that for us?
Absolutely, Josh. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody here today. To answer the question we've got up here, right? Let's be honest, the CMDB has been around for a while, and frankly, industry-wide answers are kind of hard to pin down about what healthy CMDB looks like. We take our experiences and our, the things we've done for a lot of customers and our own, like, just day in and day out work, right? We see that this really boils down to a combination of factors. One would be the overall quality of the data in the system. Another is the completeness of the source data that you're bringing into the CMDB, right? Ways and means of bringing it in. So your automation and your scheduling to bring that in is very important. And how often you use the CMDB data, right? Or for your incidents and your changes and your other decision-making processes. And to be absolutely honest with you, one of the most important things, even though it's kind of last in my list here, is governance, right? Governance of this data is super important. And finding ways to be consistent in your governance really matters. And I think really what that does is, as we talk about that, right, really starts to bring up another question, right? Does the CMDB help us or hurt us? And that's a difficult question to have, but it really, I think next we would ask is, what are the benefits of a healthy CMDB?
I like to think of the CMDB, the benefits of CMDB coming in 3 different layers. I like to start at the base, at the bottom layer in our stack, which is that the CMDB is fundamental. So if we think about how the CMDB works in ServiceNow, ServiceNow is the biggest benefit from ServiceNow is that it's an interconnected platform to manage our IT infrastructure and our IT organization. It's not a series of disparate tools. It's a whole bunch of applications that are specifically designed on the same platform to work together. And in order to take advantage of that, we need to have a healthy CMDB. The CMDB itself is the backbone of ServiceNow's interconnected platform. And so by having a healthy CMDB, by having a mature CMDB, we can fully take advantage of all of those applications. To tie into that, ServiceNow is releasing new features all the time, at least every 6 months, and oftentimes more frequent than that. And we want to be able to take advantage of those new features, especially because in most cases we're paying for them. So we want to be able to take advantage of any of those features that'll benefit us. And by having a healthy CMDB, those features can be used very quickly, with a much quicker time to take advantage of them, and we get the benefits out of them. So that's the fundamental layer, but on the opposite extreme is the strategic layer. So when we're thinking of strategy in the IT organization, what we're thinking about is the visibility into the organization's entire IT landscape. We want to be able to see the big picture so we can make good strategic decisions against it. The CMDB is central to that. we need to have an accurate representation of our IT landscape inside the CMDB so that we can make the big strategic decisions, whether it's a financial decision for the organization or it's a staffing decision. In order to know where IT is today, we need to have that CMDB healthy and mature. It's not just today, though. When we look at forecasting and we're building out trend data is inherently inaccurate. The farther we go out, the less accurate it becomes. Well, we can help boost that accuracy by having a mature and healthy CMDB. If our today's data is accurate, then our trending data is accurate for a much longer period of time, and we can help make those decisions to help grow the organization. And then finally, from the strategic side, if we bring it back just a little bit and look at the platform itself, we want to have confidence in the platform so we can grow the platform. And by having a healthy CMDB, we can have confidence that we can add additional applications and additional features to the platform and know that they're going to function the way we expect them to. So those are the kind of the bookends, the high and low. But right in the middle is a third major benefit from the CMDB, and that's efficiency. And James, I'll hand it back to you for that.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, when we think about efficiency, right, what I want to sort of focus everybody on around this idea is, what are the core goals of most IT organizations, right? We're providing services to the wider end of the business. And when we think about efficiency, we're talking about cost and uptime. Well, what the CMDB really helps you with is correcting your stuff when it goes down, right? Improving your ability to have a fast and reliable mean time to restore on your outages, whether or not that's a hardware failure, if it's a software failure, whatever. Understanding what's in, you need the CMDB really to be able to understand what is supporting a given situation so that you can more accurately assign tasks to the right team to help you bring that back up, right? To get that server back up, to get that switch replaced, right? To get that, software patched. All of those things really flow from having a system where you can see what those items are in your infrastructure and being able to accurately get the work to the right people as fast as possible. And using efficiency as well, right, is also about reducing the amount of swivel chair, having a single system, right, which is really the goal of CMDB, to be that single source of truth for a lot of this, right? It means that we don't spend our time digging through 2 and 3 and 4 systems in order to actually capture the data we need, certainly for an incident response, but also other strategic things that Josh was mentioning, right? If you're trying to capture all that data and get it all synchronized, it can be a lot of work at budget time, or if you're other times you're doing strategic evaluations of your organization. And also, we think about efficiency. The idea of automation, right, helps us get to a place where we have less individual human error going forward, right? That really makes a big difference at a platform level, right? And it's I can't stress it hard, strongly enough that that is really where the rubber meets the road, and where most of your customers and even most of your executives actually experience the use of your CMDB on a day-to-day basis. But that being said, right, we've talked about some of the platform level items, right? And I think really what that sort of boils down to is we should probably be a little bit more specific, right? So Josh, we think about this, right? What are actually some of the individual ServiceNow applications that require a healthy CMDB?
Yeah, so let's start off with the one that's probably the most obvious to most, or I should say the most likely to be used by most organizations, and that's change management. So the purpose of change management is primarily to understand the impact that a change will have across the entire organization. And in order to do that, we need to have the relationship between what we're changing and all of the other configurable items, the configuration items in the system. And so if we have a strong and healthy CMDB, then we can take advantage of things like the impact of one change against other devices in other areas. Whether we're making a change outside of a maintenance window where we're not supposed to, and that we know in advance that that's going to have impact, or whether we have large scale blackout windows that we need to apply. If we don't have a healthy, accurate CMDB, then change management is really the 2 worst case scenarios. It's either just a complex change log, which provides value to almost nobody, or it's entirely manual, and in most cases, it's both. So that's change management. Change management really needs the CMDB in order to do its job. The next one on the list is what we often associate with the CMDB, and that's asset management. And James, I'll hand it back to you.
I think you're absolutely right, Josh. Asset management is really does rely heavily on the CMDB, because when you think about it, asset management and the configuration management, right? Those records themselves are effectively twins, right? You need both of them in order for your programs to actually be successful in the long run. So there's an old story, right, that an asset and CI are two sides of the same coin, right? From a record perspective, you're talking about that a given device, right, a given piece of software with multiple different lenses, right? But regardless, it's all still the same piece of same CI, right, based on the lingo. And that really matters, because if you don't have those records in sync, you really start to have struggles controlling what's going on. So one of the easiest examples to think about is software installations, right? As you might imagine, your software asset management team absolutely cares about how many software installations you have. And if we pick on something like, say, Microsoft SQL, right, they want to know how many versions of SQL they have, so they can are actually installed versus how many have they actually paid Microsoft for. And that data, right, how much they paid for something is the asset record, but how many they have installed, that's part of the configuration management database. That's where that information rolls up into and lives. And these things need to be in sync always going forward, so you can actually have a valid idea of what's in your environment and make really smart decisions. And speaking of knowing what's in your environment, I think one of the other really key areas, and I'll pass this over to Josh, right, is the security aspects that CMDB supports.
Yeah, so security is an interesting one. In some respects, we almost think of it as an opposite to the asset space, in that many times when we're looking at security, we're not thinking about the CMDB. We're thinking that it's kind of its own thing. The reality is that security programs absolutely require a healthy CMDB in order to be usable at all. I like to use vulnerability response as the example here, because it actually pairs very, very closely to asset management. Just like an asset is the combination of the financial data and the configuration data, we need to pair those together. We do exactly the same thing in the vulnerability space. A vulnerability response requires that we understand what is vulnerable. So we need to understand the vulnerability and the impacted device or software. If we don't have the information on the impacted device or software, if all we have is the vulnerability, then we have no ability to take efficient, accurate action against it. When we look at that from the scope of vulnerability responses, almost unmanageable volume of data. That means that if we can't put those pieces together, we can't do grouping. We can't have any automation around assignment. We have very inaccurate prioritization information. And the largest challenge that we have is that lack of visibility means that security and IT can't work together on the problem. In any real sense, a vulnerability should be remediated 80% of the time by the IT department that owns the systems. And when we can't combine those two with a clean and healthy CMDB, then all the work for vulnerability response falls on the shoulders of the security team, which is completely unmanageable. And speaking of unmanageable, one of the questions that comes up all the time with the CMDB is, how do I maintain it? Why is it so hard to maintain the CMDB, given that it is a foundational component of the system? It's used for making strategic decisions. It provides a variety of benefits and efficiency, and it's required for many applications. So why is it so hard to maintain a CMDB, James?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, right, when we talk to customers about this, right, and my own experiences, even as a customer, really a lot of this boils down to the fact that a lot of organizations do not necessarily consider taking a holistic approach to maintain this, right? Configuration management, right, the first two letters in the acronym, right, is an actual discipline in of its own. And so taking a programmatic approach means, setting up this as you would treat just any other program. Do you have a program, certainly maybe not a PMO, right? We're not doing a core install. This is ongoing maintenance of this data. And so you want to have a situation where you have people in specific roles who know what their responsibilities are, people who are helping to make sure that they have the automation that they need to bring in this data and maintain that data, through systems, right? Having a distribution of the responsibility of checking the data as well is really important. Asking one person in the organization to be able to, know every single thing about every single CI is just it's a recipe for overkill. You're going to burn that person out if they even handle all of the various responsibilities. So setting that up so you actually treat that where different teams own those relationships, own portions of the work, but are guided is really, really important. And additionally, right, as you said, there's really the situation where we need to be thinking about that things like audit, right? Are we checking our work, and are we checking to make sure that, using some of those things proactively as a system? It gives us the ability to have reporting, has visibility, which allows also for there to be continued investment in your CMDB going forward. And so that's really part of why what we take and part of our solution here is for our CMDB Pulse offering, right, involves some of those concepts. So that said, though, why don't we talk for a minute here about what the CMDB Pulse offering is and how this helps us address some of our problems?
Sure, I'll jump in here. So James, as you said, that when we're dealing with the challenge of maintaining the CMDB, it's really a combination of the system itself and of the governance. So it's the people, the process, the tool. And so we needed to solve that issue by being able to properly identify the current state of the CMDB, both from a configuration and a data perspective, but also the current state of the people and process, the governance side. So we built CMDB Pulse to be a full assessment of both sides. So let me walk you through what CMDB Pulse actually includes, and we'll go into some of the details on it. So CMDB Pulse starts with two of our experts, a technical expert and a process expert, coming in and working together and setting a baseline. If we go all the way back to that first question we talked about what is CMDB health, they're sitting down and defining what is CMDB health for you, so that every organization understands what is going to be needed. And from there, they split up. The technical expert works on a data analysis. Now we're running a data analysis of the configuration and the data on the system using a proprietary application that ITS has built that runs in platform. And this is built around this concept of health factors. So you can think about health factor as the logical structure of metrics that tell you whether something is healthy or not. We have a total of 14 of these health factors inside the CMDB and 174 metrics divided up amongst these health factors. So we're doing a very large check of the CMDB and then grouping it logically. Out of those health factors come findings, so what we have identified as an issue, and recommendations, what the action plan for you to solve. More than 50 of the recommendations we have are specifically tied to ServiceNow best practices, and then we have a large number of them that are based on our own experience. While the technical assessment is occurring, we have a comprehensive process and governance review. So our process expert sits down and understands the people and the roles that you currently have and the ones that might be missing, understands which processes are in place and which ones aren't. And they take that information along with the technical information, and we build a critical diagnosis. So we figure out what your critical findings are, the good and the bad, as well as our critical recommendations, the top 5 things to do to make a difference. And we present that at the strategic level. But that isn't really enough to solve the issue. So we also do a full technical readout, go in depth into what our findings were, the data that we have, our recommendations, and build out an action plan. And we'll take a look at a few of these pieces here. So the first thing that we'll look at is just a quick look at the tool itself. As I said, we have an ITS built proprietary application that runs in platform on ServiceNow in order to analyze those health factors. So we scan all of those metrics, we get back the results from all of those metrics, and then we group them into health factors and score them. When we talk about scoring, we can see here that there's an example of the health factors. So these are the actual health factors that we're running in CMDB Pulse. Each of them is scored based on their metrics, and those scores are weighted, and we give you a total score. The total score is nice to have a general idea of where you sit from a 1 to 5 scale, but what's really valuable are the individual health factors and being able to say, okay, well, this is one that I'm doing pretty well on. This other one really needs attention, and then it helps us figure out where we need to focus. We dive into each of those individual health factors by looking at the metrics that built it. So we look at the score that we've given all of those metrics, again, a 1 to 5 score, but more importantly, we look at the values that drove us to that score. And that helps you get a sense of how close or far away you are from that metric being where it needs to be. In addition to the actual metrics, we have those critical findings and recommendations. So we have the top 3 or 4 things that we found in every health factor that needs attention, and then our recommendations on where to go with those. And of course, we dive into those pretty deeply. So when we do our full technical readout, which is part of CMDB Pulse, we cover the details behind each health factor, so you understand what that health factor means, what its purpose is, how it benefits or hurts you, and then dive into each of the individual findings, like you see here, as well as recommendations. So that covers the technical side, but of course, there's also the governance side as well, and I want to hand that back to James.
Thanks, Josh. As we said, right, one of the other core pieces of this offering is a review, really a deep dive review, frankly, about where a given organization is at that point in time with your configuration management, governance, processes, and planning. Right, and we use that information. We sit down and have a series of sessions with relevant folks who have been currently assigned those roles, and sort of walk through what's working for them, what's not working for them. Understand, try to at as a high level as possible what's going right, so we can also then say, okay, and here are our gaps, and start to tell people, all right, so this is your, help identify your gap. Oh, hey, we don't have a process owner, right? Or we're missing a few standards, or and there's a number of areas that can all boil out to. But we spend a lot of time with that as well, right? And as we've mentioned, we include this as part of our findings and recommendations document, and we also spend time going through this the key critical areas and our findings on the governance side, and with a set of recommendations, and we make sure we bring that to our executive summary conversation. We want to make sure that we get the executive sponsors to buy in on the change to help also support the process going forward.
So thank you, James. To wrap up the discussion here about CMDB Pulse, and before we open up for questions, I just wanted to say again that we built CMDB Pulse to help answer these questions. Where am I? Where is my data? What configuration is in place that's preventing me from taking advantage of the whole ServiceNow platform? And on the governance side, understanding the people and process that are needed so that I can really be confident about the foundational component of my system, so that I can make positive strategic decisions, and so that I can move the whole thing forward. So CMDB Pulse is available now. If you'd like to learn more about it, go to itsdelivers.com/CMDB Pulse. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Rachel.
All right, Josh and James, we have one that came in. It says, I have been using ServiceNow for a while. I have gotten along fine without a CMDB. Why do I need one?
Sure. So I'll start this off, but I'm sure James is going to want to jump in as well. We hear this one a lot. Organizations that start with ServiceNow for ITSM and often start with implementing incident, will feel like the CMDB is something they can get to later. They can get to when they need it for one of the other applications that we discussed. The reality is, though, that you miss a lot of the opportunities to actually improve and save time and money on the help desk if you don't have the CMDB. So incident management, yes, incident management's focus is primarily to resolve issues as quickly as possible. But if you can't associate an issue to a specific configuration item in the system, then you lose the ability to look for patterns and solve issues long-term. Even if you're not doing formal problem management, you can do a lot of informal problem management specifically by having a better CMDB so that you can show those relationships. Plus, when you do start to expand, especially into asset management, that history of no good data in the CMDB really hampers the assets team ability to make progress.
Absolutely. And one other thing I'll add to that too, right, is if you think about it, a number of you probably have heard of the CSDM, the Common Services Data Model. That is a subset here that exists on the platform, right? And it's about helping everybody really structure out what the different uses of some of the core data tables are, and also how you devise your service delivery aspects on the platform. And one of the absolute key pillars in that is what they call an application service. The application service needs to have relevant and accurate CIs in order for you to actually understand what a given service is actually being supported at a technical level. If you have an Exchange server, what are the machines, right, and the software platforms that are actually supporting Exchange, so that if one of those goes down, how do you actually able to, as we said earlier, resolve that issue, right, as soon as humanly possible, and not have people just searching around trying to find old documentation or find the guy who knows where the thing is buried, right? So getting your CMDB in a really good health is really important for that, to make your speed of service really get increased as well.
That's great, guys. Thanks. We had another question come through. Is this more of a one-time thing, or do you continue with regular assessments after coming up with a baseline and first recommendations?
Yeah, so I'll grab that one. So it's both. We've designed it to support both. Given the experience we've had with customers so far, we've seen both particular needs. Whether it be the just a single assessment before a project to make sure that everything's ready and we know where it is, or to build out that long-term assessment model. CMDB Pulse works in both ways. It was originally designed to run the scan and give us the data and then rerun it as necessary. And then, of course, on the governance side, we have a lot of experience doing governance program management. So we expect that there are going to be different needs from different customers, and the two main ones will be that one-off scan or that regular, usually quarterly or biannually checkup.
And I see another question that's coming here about how can the Pulse offering here benefit teams that already have asset and seem to be in place. And what I'd like to say about that is, we mentioned before, right now we're at 174 different parts of the metrics that we actually evaluate on the CMDB. A number of those are areas about where we're looking at the completeness of that data and the referential relationships between different sections of the CMDB. So do you have your assets and CIs in sync? Are your manufacturer names in good places? Are you using things like the normalization engines correctly so that you have the ability to do that easier reporting? So you can actually understand what your actual environment is, right? How many Dell machines do you have? How many Microsoft licenses do you have? All of that, right? But if you have them, some folks who've been on the, around some of the ITOM or CMDB for a while know that in some of the older versions, right, some of that data could be the wild, wild west. You let discovery or other things bring that in, and you get all sorts of interesting spellings, and that really complicates your ability to really narrow down and actually understand things unless you really are super diligent about that. So getting to a CMDB, right, and understanding what your current state is gives us that opportunity as well to look for those kinds of information and a whole bunch of other metrics as well to help you provide recommendations to make those journeys in your CMDB or in your asset teams much easier going forward.
Thanks, James. I saw another comment on here, not a question, but a comment, but I wanted to call it out because I totally agree with it, which is waiting until later to implement a CMDB is a bad idea. I totally agree. We unfortunately see it fairly often, but building out the governance, building out the data model, when you start to use ServiceNow is a big benefit and removes a lot of the headaches that will come down the road. So again, mostly just calling out and agreeing with the statement, but I didn't want to ignore it.
James, I might have one for you. Can you talk about the governance aspect in more depth? Example, Pulse identifies challenges where governance is a solution. What then?
Yeah, so if we see, we're coming in and we're seeing some areas with governance, what we want to do is help an organization break down where those gaps are and what a reasonable set of steps looks like to make improvements to that, and start to fill in those gaps. Once that sort of that basic foundation from a governance is put into place, then we can look at whether or not the governance that's in place is effective, whether or not it's actually being applied consistently across the organization. Some of that you actually capture not from the individual conversations with the people who own the roles, but you can see that in the data, right? These things work together in certain ways. So if you have an organization that says, hey, I have a policy that says everything has to be updated, in or audited maybe in every 6 months. Well, you can see that if they're set those values up, and part of we have the tool enabled so that you can say, oh, well, am I actually catching these values? Am I seeing that on track? Is that not happening? Maybe that's part of why we're seeing inconsistent results in the actual CMDB data on the back end. So we try to leverage those things together, right? But some of it is also like looking at where it makes sense, as I said, from a roles and responsibilities perspective, and does the situation that is in place at the moment really support the overall needs? And honestly, do the people whose names are currently associated even know that's the job they have? Right? We all wear a lot of hats in a lot of organizations, and sometimes people forget that that's one of the ones that's on the hook in the closet. And so sometimes just bringing that back around can be a really valuable exercise as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. That's great. We got another one. How does CMDB Pulse relate to ServiceNow's playbooks?
Sure, great question. So some of you might be aware that ServiceNow has published a series of playbooks to help set the standards for CMDB, really to set ServiceNow's best practice for CMDB. And if you haven't looked at these, they're very valuable documents. As I mentioned earlier, we have around 50 of our recommendations are tied specifically to ServiceNow best practices. Many of these are tied to the playbook. So we're well aware of the playbooks. We make sure to reference those playbooks and to get you back to those playbooks when that is the best solution to a problem.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We got another question. How long does a CMDB Pulse engagement typically take for an organization that has a CMDB but has data quality and completeness concerns?
Yeah, so typically CMDB Pulse takes about a month. And that's from our step 1 to step 5. So that's from when we get in there and have the initial conversation about what is health, what does health look like, to the point where we do the readout. It can go a little longer, especially if we need to take a little more time on the governance side, or if the technical readout needs a little bit more detail, but typically it's about a month.
Another one we have is, what is the best method to get buy-in from management to get something like this implemented? I know the data is bad and it's likely even worse than I realized, but I don't own the CMDB and or platform, and we don't have user specific to manage this.
I'll start with that at least, right, to try to help them. This is a common enough problem, right, on this platform. I've been using ServiceNow for more than 10 years. Your situation you sort of mentioning there is not, it's definitely things I've seen before, both in a customer role and certainly here, in the space where we operate in ITS. So one, I want you to understand you should not necessarily feel alone, right? The part of what you're saying there, right, or asking about, really does boil down to the political and the financial backing. One of the things we talk with a lot of our customers about is getting executive sponsorship or buy-in about how to actually maintain and get the most value out of the platform overall. CMDB is one area of that, right? And so understanding like maybe what that structure looks like in your organization, and trying to then figure out where some of the folks in those roles are seeing challenges in the organization. It gives us the opportunity sometimes to help say, hey, listen, so I see that we're spending too much money on this problem, right? And we can't actually control, again, we talked about MTTR, right? We believe that we're spending extra hours every week, right, and downtime, right, which is really expensive. I don't know if this has ever come across to you guys, but there are some industry metrics that show sort of a generic level that you can end up with something like $500,000 an hour or more in a number of organizations, and when your IT services are offline. Well, that's a major area for cost savings. And so if you can understand what your downtime looks like, and then say, this is part of our path to reducing that overall downtime, capturing this, getting our CMDB into good places, then also leveraging that to help improve our change or our direct incident management processes are really an opportunity there. But it is a sales pitch to an extent, right? An internal thing where you have to sort of build some of that political will or connect the dots to the people who do own that but haven't been thinking about it recently.
All right. Well, as we transition to close, ITS, we've spent the last 25 years packing our team with the industry experience you can depend on. We believe that the best IT advisors are practitioners with decades of real world IT experience, people who know their stuff, get their hands dirty, and care about outcomes. So if you would like to learn more about CMDB Pulse and get in touch with one of our sales reps or experts, scan the QR code, fill out the short form, and we'll be in touch with you shortly. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day.